Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Junkyard Dawgcast. I'm your host, Jordan Hill. Want to give you guys some insight on what we're talking about tonight. This is going to be a Georgia basketball episode of the Junkyard Dawgcast. Georgia Bulldogs going back to the NCAA Tournament for the first time since 2015. 9 seed going to be playing 8 seed Gonzaga. This is going to be a basketball-centric episode talking about Georgia's return to the tournament, initial thoughts on Gonzaga, and thoughts on how the bracket as a whole shook out. So be sure to subscribe on our YouTube at Dogs 24/7. It's going to be a fun episode. And with that, we're going to get this thing going. Another episode of the Junkyard Dawgcast, a breaking news episode of the Junkyard Dawgcast. I'm your host, Jordan Hill. Got the whole crew with us, Kipp Adams and Ben Wolk, on this Sunday night to talk about Georgia basketball. The Georgia Bulldogs are back in the NCAA tournament for the first time in 10 years. Georgia is going to be a number 9 seed out in the Midwest region, going to be taking on number 8 Gonzaga on Thursday out in Wichita as part of the region of the bracket where Houston is the number 1 seed. A lot to get into about the Bulldogs as they gear up for a highly anticipated return to the postseason and specifically the NCAA tournament. So a lot to tackle on this episode. We're going to start with initial thoughts on really just basically Georgia being back in the tournament for the first time in 10 years. Talk briefly about Gonzaga because I think all three of us would admit we haven't done a deep dive on the Bulldogs yet, but talk about initial thoughts there. I'll share a little bit about what Mike White, Blue Kane, Silas Demery Jr. had to share with reporters after it became official. And then we'll probably take a break and come back and talk about the bracket as a whole. But I want to start with you, Ben. Just get your initial thoughts. Georgia is back in the NCAA tournament, back as a part of March Madness. Let's just start there initially with the fact that Georgia is in the NCAA tournament again.
Yeah, I mean, this is a Junkyard Dawgcast that hasn't been done in 10 years. I mean, I haven't been here long enough to even have had the opportunity to do something like this. Kipp, I'm sure you've probably talked some Georgia making the NCAA tournament before on one of these, but you know, those were back in your glory days a little bit. So I think that it's fun. I mean, it was a no sweat Sunday. Like Georgia lost the first round of the SEC tournament. And I think coming into the week and even coming out of the week, even despite that, there was never any concern whatsoever whether Georgia's name was going to appear. I don't know. It's been a while since I've been watching Selection Sunday through the lens of a team that was sort of at one point a bubble team that you don't really think is a bubble team anymore. And when you see the first two brackets come out, I guess anxiety starts to heighten a little bit, probably for everyone that's just like, you just want to see the name just, to be certain. But again, with that 9 seed, never really a doubt. I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about the draw specifically and what the matchup's going to look like. But I think it's fun that you're staring at a team that has a lot of brand value going into March Madness. I mean, Gonzaga is a team that's been around forever. And so I think it's fun that Georgia draws a team like that for the first time in a decade.
Yeah, wild stuff. Had a chance to be on hand. They had a watch party. Shout out to Mike White, SID, Mike Mobley, everyone involved, John Bateman as well, to let the media come in and be a part of the show, get to kind of watch everybody react to the news. But yeah, I mean, I keep talking about this. I was in college the last time Georgia was in the NCAA tournament. I wasn't covering Georgia basketball back then, but just neat to see the way they built this thing. And there's been stumbling blocks along the way. Mike White talked tonight, was asked about, the fact that last year they talked about the NCAA tournament being a real goal for that team. And they fell short of that. And there was a period there where they had 2 4-game losing streaks this season, and I thought that they were working their way off the bubble, but play well at Auburn, beat Florida, and it just seems like even with that Oklahoma loss in the SEC tournament, they've been riding high. And, congrats to Mike White, to all the players for sticking together, because this is a real accomplishment no matter what happens next. Kipp, what's your initial thoughts on the Bulldogs playing meaningful basketball in March again?
I'm still trying to figure out when my glory days were. I guess we can discuss that off the air. And, if those ever occurred, I'd love to hear more about that. But I've been covering Georgia athletics for, I think this is my 20th year. And this is the fourth time Georgia's made the tournament. And I could safely say I was not podcasting the last time that they made the tournament in 2015. And I can also safely say I was not covering Georgia at all the last time they won, which was, I believe, 2002. So I think it's, fortunately for this program, it's a rare occasion. And, you could look at the matchup and think about all of that, but just celebrate the fact that you're here. And it's okay to not, just be, content just to be there. You should want to win, and you should celebrate being in this tournament every year if you're a program like Georgia. And the fact that, honestly, Georgia's got three of the best wins in the country. I mean, St. John's, Kentucky, Florida. Once they got the Florida win, and that 4-game win streak, you kind of knew, they were in. And honestly, that it should have been a single digit seed. And you could debate whether or not it's better to be a 10 seed than a 9 seed. That's kind of just the way brackets. It's a weird thing about brackets is that you start looking ahead to that second round matchup, not really worrying about getting a tougher first round draw. But I think it's good that Georgia's playing this kind of basketball right now, even with the SEC tournament loss. I mean, just look for 14 teams in the tournament like that. That was a tougher tournament than what we're going to see when we just saw this SEC tournament. And so when you are comparing the two teams right now, that we're about to break down, you can say that Georgia's not only battle tested, but they're battle tested recently. And I think that's kind of a positive aspect and something if you want to look for optimism heading into Thursday, it's just the fact that Georgia, for the most part, has played really good basketball against tournament level teams as of late.
No doubt about that. Wanted to set the scene a little with that watch party they had on Sunday. I had the team there, all the coaches. UGA President Jerry Moorhead was there. UGA Athletic Director Josh Brooks was there. Had several fans. You had the family of coaching staff and like the strength staff. It was a pretty packed house for the show, and I was talking to some of the other folks there. As the show gets going, Mike White, I compared it to when you go to a wedding and the bride and the groom are just very slowly making their way to every table. And I think it was a product of just kind of being anxious. There's nothing he can do. He's just waiting to see Georgia pop up. So he said his hellos to everybody. And then I posted the video on Twitter of the moment it happened when Georgia popped up. Funny thing too, somebody pointed this out, that they were looking at one of the smaller screens in the room. They had chairs set up around a huge flat screen, but that feed, I guess that didn't have a direct feed. It was probably getting it wirelessly. It was several seconds behind the other TVs in the room. So eventually, as that first region sort of announced, they all realized, okay, we're better off watching one of these other TVs. So that's what kind of happened there. Want to share just quickly some of the stuff from the post-selection show press conference. Mike White, Silas Emery Jr., Blue Cane. Mike talked about how this team has been resilient. He said it a few times, just how they've worked hard, stuck together. The thing that I thought was really revealing to me, Silas was asked, where has this team gotten better? Where has this team grown since, they started practicing in the summer? And he just said responses. He said that this team, doesn't back down. He said, we've gotten to the point in certain practices where we just don't call fouls. And when you kind of practice that way, when you don't get a call you like in a game, you're not going up arguing with the ref. You're just like, well, he's not going to change the call. We just got to move on. you could tell there was a lot of pride between Silas and Blue, and I'd say Mike as well, in that this group stuck together. There were rumors last offseason about Silas Demery entering the portal and sort of wondering what Georgia would do if that happened. But he stays, Blue Kane stays, Dylan James stay, and they're rewarded in their second season, their sophomore years, with a chance to go back, to take Georgia back to the NCAA tournament. A lot, as will become clear as we talk about Gonzaga, Mike White and these players don't really know that much about Gonzaga. Mike talked really highly of Mark Few, which you wouldn't be surprised with the success that they've had there at Gonzaga. They're coming off a West Coast Conference tournament victory, winning the championship over St. Mary's, 25-8, 14-4 in the West Coast Conference. It's tough when you consider the two programs you're comparing. You got a Gonzaga team that has been on the cusp of winning championships. Shout out Dog Nation's Connor Riley pointed out they've got one of the longest, if not the longest, active streak of wins in the first round. This is not a team that makes the tournament and very quickly leaves the tournament. So that's going to be very complicated and very difficult as far as a matchup when you consider this a Georgia team that, really none of these players have been here other than, I think, RJ Godfrey. I might be forgetting someone else that made a tournament appearance along the way. But, yeah, I mean, it's difficult from that standpoint, but it's still, an 8-9 matchup, one that's worth watching and one that's worth keeping an eye on. So let's talk, guys, just based on what we know on Gonzaga. We're going to study this team a lot more before Thursday gets here. But I'll start with you, Kipp. Just general thoughts of pulling Gonzaga, Georgia playing one of the perennial championship contenders and having to play them right off the jump.
They weren't going to get an easy draw no matter what. But I think they got probably the toughest team to peg, really, in this whole bracket, because you just look at the stats across the board. There's no weakness statistically, really. And their point guard play is off the charts. The point guard leads the country in assists. It's an incredible assist to turnover ratio as well. But at the same time, they've only got one top 50 win since November. And they're 4-6 against top 50 teams, according to KenPom rankings. So, like I said, with Georgia, they're having to play a quad one team every single, twice a week. But yet, Gonzaga, they've only got, again, one top 50 win since November. And I just think they haven't really had a lot of moments where you go, okay, this is a Mark Few team that I'm familiar with. This is an Elite Eight. This is a Final Four team. You just haven't really seen it. I mean, even in the conference run, it's just kind of, okay, that's what they were expected to do. They haven't really been tested, but they shoot lights out. They have a great defense. And I think that you really look at the most difficult aspect for Georgia is just the fact that Ryan Nembhard is, again, like I said, maybe takes care of the basketball. He's the best pure point guard in the country. And so I just think that's going to be a situation where we're looking at a Georgia team that does turn the ball over a lot. The point guard play has been the Achilles heel of this team, and they're matched up against maybe, the best pure point guard in the country. So matchup-wise, I think it was going to be tough for Georgia all along. But I still kind of like the fact that they could play with these guys when it comes to pacing, when it comes to attacking the boards. And I think it's a great opportunity for Georgia's bigs to just get them some extra possessions with block shots and crashing the board. So there are some areas where Georgia can kind of take advantage of. I honestly think, and it's cliche as can be, but they're going to have to make their free throws.
Yeah, I mean, that's going to be huge. The margin for error, again, against a team that has been on the stage before and has, risen to this occasion. Georgia's going to have to grow up quick. And Mike White has made the point quite a bit that Georgia is young and that they're still learning. And they're going to be tested out of the gates. Do want to mention this because this has been posted, and you'll probably see me typing a little bit as we continue this podcast. Georgia will play 4:35 p.m. Eastern time on Thursday, TBS. So we'll update that story as we're doing this podcast. But afternoon slate to get things going out there in Wichita on Thursday. Ben, initial thoughts on it being Gonzaga, Bulldogs versus Bulldogs matchup, and again, a perennial championship contender for Georgia right out of the gate.
Well, like you said, I haven't been watching enough Gonzaga basketball this year to be able to really speak on them, but I've spent like the last hour reading about them and watching things on them, so I can at least pretend like I know what I'm talking about when it comes to Gonzaga. Like Kipp said, I mean, and this is Mark Few's staple, like they're always going to have great guard play. They always have. That's why they are as successful in March as they have been. He mentioned Ryan Nembhard. I think of an interesting little sub story, Jordan, here with Nembhard. His older brother, Andrew Nembhard, recruited by Mike White, played for Mike White for 3 years. He ends up transferring to Gonzaga. I know that Mike White has to know the Nembhard family very, very well, so I'm sure he's known this guy from a very, very young age. He's a great player. Like Kipp said, he's going to manufacture a lot of offense for them, and everything that they do offensively goes through him. Jordan and I, we were talking about this last week, like how where I think Georgia might match up well. Like if you sometimes in the tournament you can have certain matchups where you catch the right team in a certain spot and it's just a favorable matchup. I thought that where Georgia could see that was with their bigs. You've got Asa Newell, who's one of the more talented big men in all of college basketball. You've got Santos Surreal, who just brings a component defensively and just even offensively at times in the paint that not many teams have. Issue with Gonzaga, they've got a couple of guys 6'9", 6'10". I think their leading scorer that averages like 17, 18 points a game is 6'9", 250. So it'll be an interesting matchup. I mean, these are the moments that a guy like Asa Newell buys into coming to Georgia to play in. Like you hope that Georgia what they're selling you is honest and that they can get to a tournament despite some of its history. And now you're Asa Newell and you're there. This is your opportunity to go up against some more experienced in college basketball bigs than you that, you can, move up the draft boards a little bit. You can prove this is why I am the freshman phenom that people have positioned me to be. And so it's a great opportunity, I think, for Silas Demery and Blue Kane playing against these guards that are really talented, especially Nembhard, and then for Asa Newell to have this could be a big step up, moment for him. And if we're talking about Asa Newell 10, 15 years from now and after a long NBA career, like these are the types of moments where his legend can kind of be formed. And that's what's fun about college basketball. And that's why I think just making the tournament is the win in all of this. Like there were moments throughout this season that Georgia was not expecting. I mean, if Georgia misses the tournament this year, we're having a very, very different conversation about the future of this basketball program. And now it's like, yeah, it'd be nice to win one. And it sounds like loser talk, I guess, if you're saying like, oh, it's just happy to be here. But I will say it's unfortunate that you're playing an 8 seed that is the number 9 team in KenPom. So in terms of the predictive measurements, it's a 3-line type of team, and you're playing them as an 8 seed. I mean, I think they're a top 10 offensive rating in college basketball, top 30 defensive rating in college basketball. So, I mean, if I'm just looking at the styles of play, this is a game where Georgia's going to need to find a way to slop it up a little bit. Georgia has one of the top 30 defensive ratings in the country. Turn this into a lower scoring game, find a way to just make it painful, maybe get some of these guards into foul trouble. Like if you get Nembhard into foul trouble early, it makes things look a little bit different for what they're trying to do offensively. But the problem with the team like Gonzaga is like they're one of those teams like I've talked about with Florida in the SEC. It's like they can kind of score 85 on anyone. So you just got to find a way to score. And Georgia is not known for just lighting it up offensively on the scoreboard. Now, this stretch where they've been successful down the end of the season, they've been hitting a lot of their shots. So they can hang in those types of games. It's just not the type of game where I think that they should feel confident. So they just got to find a way to make it a more ugly style of game. And then, like Kipp said, hit your free throws, hit some shots, and try and find a way to sneak out of there. And then I don't want to look ahead to Houston already, but like another matchup where it's like Georgia might, because of their bigs, like Asa Newell and Santos Surreal, might be able to dominate some other teams that they find in the tournament just based on that matchup. You're not going to be able to do that to Houston. They're probably the best rebounding team in all of college basketball. So just sort of an unfortunate, again, not knowing a ton about Gonzaga or Houston feels like an unfortunate matchup look for Georgia. But again, it's March Madness. Crazy things happen. We really have no idea what this is going to look like at 4:35 on Thursday.
Right. It'll be something to watch. To y'all's point, I mean, on one hand, it is difficult and I know some Georgia fans are frustrated that they're pulling Gonzaga, but I mean, personally, if I was looking at it from Georgia's perspective, I'd rather play Gonzaga than UConn. And that was a matchup I kept seeing in some of those, bracketology predictions. You really want to play a team that's won back-to-back championships and knows how to keep the momentum going this time of year. So it was going to be difficult no matter what. And that's just sort of the nature of when you're playing this time of year.
And I don't want to take a shot at any specific brands and their random fan bases get mad at me or whatever. But I'm thinking you could be in an 8-9 game where you're playing a team like Minnesota or something like that. There's no real historical interest in that program. And again, if we're being fair here, I'm sure that's how Gonzaga feels getting matched up against Georgia. It's there's nothing super interesting about getting matched up with Georgia basketball as a brand. But as a team like Georgia, you get in the tournament, you get a chance to play a program like Gonzaga or a program like UConn. I think you should embrace those types of moments because, every single Georgia basketball player probably would have loved to have been getting recruited by Gonzaga at one point or another. So,
yeah, it's the Aaron Cook game, right? That's the guard that came over from Gonzaga a few years ago. And again, before we take a break, turn the page again, credit to Mike White and his staff and what they built. We're talking about a program that, in Tom Crean's last year, they won a SEC game. And I think they won 6 games as a whole that year. And the SEC's only gotten more difficult since then. And I think that in the toughest year of SEC basketball ever, you're one of 14 teams that make the tournament. That is something worth celebrating. I did want to point out, someone asked if Tyron Lawrence had been in an NCAA tournament before. He had not. While he was at Vanderbilt, they made a couple NIT appearances with Jerry Stackhouse as the coach, but had not made the tournament. All right, guys, any thoughts on Georgia before we take a quick break and then talk about the bracket as a whole?
I think you look at this Gonzaga team. I looked all 5 seniors, and none of them missed a game this season. So as far as just the draw and the experience, it's going to be tough to get this team rattled. And I think that's kind of where if you're Mike White, you're probably going to have to maybe use some timeouts to make sure you reel your guys in and they keep their composure if the game starts to, tip one way or the other, good or bad. I just think that is going to be an aspect where you're not going to see Mark Few's team, start play careless basketball. So Georgia's going to have to reel it in and probably, do something differently than what we've seen from them for most of the season. They're going to have to turn it up a notch, but at the same time, I think this is an incredible experience. This is what you need for this roster looking ahead to next season. And again, I'll keep saying it. Ace Newell, show everyone that you're a lottery pick. This is as good of a resume game as you're going to get.
Yeah, legends are made in March, and Ace is going to get his opportunity to make his legacy and make himself one of the Georgia greats. If you're able to win this game. Again, I think this was mentioned earlier. It's been 23 years since Georgia won an NCAA tournament game. As far as the NCAA is concerned, that game is no longer counts. I think you have to go back to 97 when Tubby Smith was still coaching. So, yeah, it's a real opportunity, and it's going to be fun to follow this team on the way to Wichita. Looking forward to the opportunity to do that. I do want to go ahead before we take a break and plug the 50% off sale that we've still got going on. I think that might end on Monday night. The best time of the year to get on board. You've got Georgia basketball coverage. As I said, I'll be in Wichita if you want to follow along what's going on there. Georgia football, getting ready for the second week of spring practice, continuing to put up intel from that. Georgia recruiting, Ben's been all over that in a very interesting stretch when you are coming off of Jared Curtis, a big-time quarterback visiting. Georgia baseball, Olivia Sayer just absolutely crushing the Georgia baseball coverage for us. So a fantastic time to join. I hope all of y'all will do so and super excited for the weeks ahead. We're going to take a quick break, come back and look kind of bigger picture at this year's NCAA tournament, pull up the bracket, see what we think, give our initial thoughts on the road ahead for the 68 teams that are still alive in the race for the national championship. All right, guys, for those of you watching on YouTube, I've pulled up the bracket for this year and allowing everybody to take a look at that. And I will say that I have not really studied the bracket much because I was over there at the selection show get together and the interviews right after that. I really haven't looked really much outside of Georgia's region of the bracket, and kind of going to be catching up as we record this. But I'll start with you guys, and I'll start with you, Ben. Just initial thoughts on how this bracket shook out. Does anything in particular stand out to you? Were any teams that got in or any teams that were left out surprise you? What are your initial thoughts on this year's bracket?
My initial thoughts are the same probably as every year. And it's, if you're not watching this on YouTube, you're missing out, because just looking at a bracket is just beautiful. There are a few things that I love more than just seeing the NCAA tournament bracket unfilled out in all of its glory. Obviously, the CBS Sports branding front and center right there from our folks at the top as well. Great job there, Jordan. It's awesome. And the fact that Georgia's included in that, I think, makes it a little bit more, interesting in our world. But this is one of my favorite times of year. And every time that I see this bracket, I just get fired up. So that's my initial thought every single time. We could probably just run that clip back next year when we're talking about this as well. In terms of teams that got snubbed, I'll be honest with you, I haven't been tracking the bubble down the stretch as closely as I probably should have, just because it felt like Georgia was safely in and that it wasn't really something that they needed to worry about as much. I think the most interesting thing, and it's what everyone's going to be talking about, and for me as someone that likes to stir the pot, like the North Carolina being the team that everyone was up in arms about, and then they immediately cut to the chair of the selection committee, who's their North Carolina athletic director, Bubba Cunningham, who obviously had to answer to the fact that he recused himself and that his vice chair led everything during that time. But it was just the perfect TV cut where it's like, oh, North Carolina is kind of the team that everyone's upset about. Let's cut to the committee chair to ask him questions. And it's the director of athletics, Bubba Cunningham from North Carolina, just right there like that. I mean, that's going to be sort of the meme of the whole thing, I think. But I don't know enough about everyone's resumes to know who should be in and who should not be in. I think the big storyline that I was kind of looking at was, would Texas make it or not to make 14 SEC teams into the tournament? Texas getting into that first four solidified those 14 teams, which Greg Sankey had kind of been teasing and alluding to on social media over the last few days as well. So I think big time for the conference. I will say, I think a lot of people, I mean, it helps because there's a lot of teams. And so just mathematically, there's a greater likelihood that your teams are going to advance. But I think the SEC has been great this year. I don't necessarily think that means that an SEC team is the surefire, team that's going to win, or that they're going to have 3 out of 4 teams in the Final Four or anything like that. I haven't looked deep enough into the matchups or anything like that to see what I would think on that front. But big time just to make 14 or have 14 teams make the tournament.
It's wild. To your point about the bubble, just looking really quickly at the bracket, I think West Virginia, Boise State were a couple of those that were left out that were a little bit surprising. I don't think North Carolina had any business making this tournament. I think that, name brand and getting them in there and making sure UNC's in it, I just doesn't sit right with me. I think Texas did enough at the very end to get in, and to have them as one of the first 4 makes a lot of sense to me. Kipp, initial thoughts, and I will say this for those listening and especially those watching on YouTube. As Kipp is talking, I'm going to drop a link in the comments both on YouTube and Facebook to our CBS Sports bracket game, and we'll try to get some of those filled out tonight, get the ball rolling there. But wanted to say that, especially if you're listening to this and on whatever podcast feed you are listening to this on, I will make sure that this is in the comments there as well in the episode description. So, Kipp, what are your initial thoughts on how the bracket came together?
Yeah, I do think West Virginia is probably the biggest snub. I thought it would have been entertaining to see a Mike Woodson stepping down Indiana team make it in. It was funny because from the moment he announced he was going to resign at the end of the year, they started playing like a tournament team. And, I've watched Mike Woodson, coach the Hawks, and I agree. Like, as soon as you know he's not going to be your coach, you're probably going to play the best basketball of your life. And yeah, I mean, they beat Michigan State, they beat Purdue. Those are better wins than, I mean, North Carolina. Their best win is UCLA. So I do think that you look at that should have been a better overall resume, because North Carolina lost to Stanford. I mean, that's a quad 3 loss, and that's pretty brutal. So yeah, they got in on name recognition. I think after the first couple of rounds, this feels like the most chalk bracket possible. When you start looking, you start making those tough decisions and filling them out. Like, good luck to everyone and doing that. But I think in the end, like, this just feels like a number 1 seed Final Four. And I know a lot of people are looking at Auburn and saying they're not playing. You know, they kind of lost a little bit of steam down the stretch, but I've seen Florida do that before too, and just run through the tournament. And so I do think that game is going to be I think that'll be an epic matchup if we do get like Auburn, Florida in a Final Four. I think it'll be incredible. And then, yeah, Duke, Houston. I just think it's hard not to think that these number 1 seeds are just a tier above the rest of the whole bracket. And I think that's where, when you look at, there's no reaction of this team should have been a 1 seed. You knew who these 4 1 seeds were going to be going in. And so if we end up getting like a Florida Duke or an Auburn Duke, I just think it's going to be outstanding basketball and elite defenses and elite 3-point shooting. And that's what gets you, wins on the road, wins in any kind of situation. And I just think that looking overall into this tournament, that's going to be what whoever wins this tournament, it's going to be elite defense and 3-point shooting. It's as simple as that.
Ben, do you dare to give a quick Final Four? Is anything really jumping out to you for your Final Four?
Well, the thing is I've been so high on Florida all year. Like, I have always imagined I was going to pick Florida to win the national championship, and now it's like they've won the SEC tournament. Everyone in the world is picking Florida. Someone in the comment section just said that all 4 people, and I didn't know this, all 4 of the analysts on CBS picked Florida to win it all. It's like the team that everyone expects to win it all never wins it all. So now I'm like, am I reversing how I felt the whole time now because of the way that everyone else? I don't know. I'm going to have to do a lot of thinking tonight. There's no doubt about that. I will say there's some sneaky double-digit seeds that I do like to make some runs, though. I know McNeese is going to be a popular pick, but I just like that little quadrant that they're in. I like McNeese State to get to the Sweet 16. I think Will Wade, for all of his faults, hell of a basketball coach.
No doubt about that. Looking quickly, I guess I'm going to buy Auburn because people are selling them so low after the last few games. I think that they're going to get everything together. Like Bruce Pearl said, his guards are not wusses, or maybe he said something else. I don't remember what he said, but no, I'm sort of with you, Ben. Like, gun to my head, I'd be like Florida. But I mean, other than UConn repeating, like, it's so rare that the team everybody expects to win is going to do it. So just looking at the Final Four, I'll pick Auburn. I'll pick Florida, and I'll pick Auburn to beat Florida in the Final Four. You kind of got the Bruce Pearl, Todd Golden element of that. Tennessee, I really like. I don't really want to pick 3 SEC teams, but I'll do that, and then I'll pick Duke at the top, and I'll say this is Duke and Auburn, which is a rematch of a big game in the regular season. And I think I'm picking Duke. I think that Duke's going to get the edge there at the end. All right, guys, before we wrap this up, any final thoughts on this year's bracket, the tournament, just rapid fire, anything on your mind before we close this out?
Well, I've been on this for a while, and I don't need to be a soapbox for everyone or a broken record for everyone, but Mike White, for everything that they lose 9 out of 11 games this year. There was legitimate hot seat conversation on our message boards throughout the season, which I think most of us found to be ridiculous at the time, and I think common sense prevailed more or less throughout the course of that, but it got a little bit dicey there. And I just think that year 3, Georgia, Kipp mentioned it 4 times in his 20 years covering Georgia that he even would be having a conversation like this. Like, these moments don't happen. Treasure them. Enjoy the fact that Georgia, I think it's awesome that Georgia plays on Thursday because first day of the tournament, a lot of energy around it. Just go in, get to watch midday, Georgia playing a name brand program. Like, I think it's, awesome. The expectations change now after this year. Like, the expectations next year are not simply, be a bubble team that makes the tournament. Like, it will be different. And so enjoy these moments. And hey, anyone can win a couple of basketball games this time of year. You just got to be playing your best brand at the right time. And Georgia is playing its best basketball right now. I know they're coming off a game against Oklahoma that maybe left a bad taste in people's mouths, but I wouldn't say Georgia even played poorly in that game. Jeremiah Fears just was the best player on the court, and it just sort of took over. So, I think that the last 3 weeks, Georgia's played a style of basketball where they can win a couple of games here in March, and there's no reason that they can't other than the fact they caught a tough draw.
Going to be a fun one. Again, 4:35 p.m. Eastern time on Thursday, TBS, Georgia Gonzaga. Kipp, any parting thoughts before we end this?
I think, treasure every minute you get from Ace Newell, regardless of the outcome here. One of the best, most talented players to ever play at Georgia. And I think, the credit to Mike White for getting him to buy in, a 19-year-old in the toughest conference. I mean, this SEC is ridiculous. It feels like the last time Georgia got in, the conference was getting like 3 teams in a year. I think the fact that Georgia is the highest seeded 20-win team says a lot. And I think another thing, UC San Diego Tritons, longest winning streak in the country, could be Auburn's toughest matchup on their way to the Final Four. I just think that team is playing incredible basketball right now as well. That's my pick to at least give them a push in the Sweet 16.
I will say this about that region. If things go right for these 2 teams, it would be Auburn versus Louisville in Lexington in the second round. That's not exactly an easy draw for Auburn. All right, we're going to end the episode there. I appreciate everyone who popped on and watched this live or is listening or watching to it after the fact. Thanks to Kipp and Ben for popping on this Sunday night. Again, subscribe to Dogs247.com. If you do it right now, we got a 50% off sale. I highly encourage that before we get this thing rolling with the NCAA tournament. And again, spring practice still going on. Georgia baseball now really getting rolling in SEC play. So we'll end the episode right there. For Kipp Adams and Ben Wolk, I'm Jordan Hill. Until next time, take care, everybody.